The PSP is an absolute homebrew machine, something I enjoy playing older consoles on via emulation. Really anything up to the PlayStation 1, the Nintendo 64 runs very well. I think the form factor is great for playing Game Boy Advance games on. It's just a fun little system, and plus the PSP library itself is fantastic. I know a lot of people have picked the system up in recent years just to experience the PSP library itself because it's so good. But if you've owned a PSP only for the last 5 years or so, odds are you haven't used many UMDs. Now that's the disc that actually goes in the optical disc drive on the backside of any of the PSP models, with the exception of the PSP Go. Now, I've owned the PSP since back in the day when I got the Daxter bundle of the system. And of course, that came on a UMD, and I very fondly remember going to stores, heck, even going to Hollywood Video, the Blockbuster equivalent at one point, even being able to rent UMD discs. It was definitely something that we used to use back before, the homebrew became just so mainstream, where now it's like if you own a PSP and you're not using homebrew, it's silly. And because of that, the UMD has really became just this obscure, very proprietary piece of media that is, in my opinion, completely and 100% obsolete. And it really is rare that we encounter a scenario where the official way to play a game via the UMD is significantly worse than the quote-unquote homebrew way to play it, which is via the SD card using an ISO file. It just seems crazy to think that the correct and, legal, official way to play the game isn't even the best way to go about doing it on the actual hardware itself. I'm not talking about emulating the game on a different device that understandably can't read the original software format. No, I'm talking about actually playing the game on the device it was intended to be played on, and the homebrew way of doing it is substantially better. Now, if you do own any UMDs yet, what you want to do is, assuming that your system is modded, you actually want to rip the UMD and get the game on the SD card. Now, as I know, many people play the majority of their PSP games on the SD card, and it's even funny that we talk about the SD card because that's not the memory stick that the PSP initially came with or intended to use, but for the most part now people actually use SD cards inside of a memory stick adapter to get past having to use those really overpriced and again proprietary, outdated, and obsolete memory sticks that the PSP became known for. And this proprietary nature of the PSP is something that can be really problematic when you go back and you play it today. Of course, all these things have been fixed, with aftermarket, third-party products that ultimately don't live up to being as good as the original Sony ones, but you kind of have to just work with what you got. You've got the SD card being used rather than the original memory stick. You have the lack of even bothering to use UMDs today, but you also have you need to get a charger for it. The charger is this unique charger that you probably don't already own, and you ultimately have to buy one. You can't really charge it very well through the USB plug at the top. You can kind of, if the system already has a charge, you can kind of top it off with that, but it's really slow, and of course you have to have custom firmware to do it, and it has to be on in order to even start gaining a charge through that, so that's problematic and a hassle in itself. And this is really just a part of the PSP's larger power issue in regard to its batteries, and how the batteries that came with the system originally are by and large good for nothing anymore. Most of them hold very little charge. They're pretty much worn out from years of unuse or worn out from just too many charges from years and years of use. And ultimately, the batteries have not held up as well in retrospect as the ones in the Nintendo DS, and for that reason, oftentimes, if you want to go back and play a PSP today, you need to buy yourself some sort of off-brand, brand new, but not as good as the original battery in order to actually use the system. Now, if given the opportunity, you really don't want to play a game on UMD. The reason being that 1, it's very loud, and 2, it's very slow compared to loading the game off the SD card. And this is an issue we don't really see arise with the DS. In the case of the DS and the 3DS, people actually really like to collect those actual physical game cartridges, which is odd considering the fact that in both cases, you can either use a multi-cart on the DS, or you can use custom firmware and load the games off an SD card on the 3DS, and yet many people like to have the original game cartridge, and I'm totally understanding of that. And the reason really harkens back to my time playing on the Game Boy Advance as a kid, and the fact that that Pokemon Emerald or Pokemon Sapphire cartridge that I owned was truly my cartridge. I could put that cartridge in another Game Boy Advance and it would load up my save, and it was truly mine in the unique sense that it held my data on. And that's the same way it is for the 3DS. When I played Alpha Sapphire on a 3DS cartridge, I really felt like when I was done with that game, that was a 3DS cartridge that I wanted to keep because it held ultimately the memories of me playing Alpha Sapphire on the 3DS. It had that save file in. And I think that's something that's lost in a disc-based system like the UMD, where ultimately those discs are completely interchangeable in the fact that they don't actually store any of the user data. Outside of this, ultimately playing a game off a game cartridge on 3DS versus off the SD card is really interchangeable outside of the fact that you'd have to carry multiple game cartridges with you. It's a little bit of a hassle, but on the PSP, it's just a hassle all the way through. I mean, you're experiencing slower load times, this noisy device. But hey, it's been over 15 years since the PSP came out, and with that said, are you still playing the system like I am? Are you using UMDs? Are you playing off the SD card? Are you just using it for emulators? What are you doing with the system today? I'd love to hear. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.